Hi, this is Tony Holbein. You're listening to the Revenue Formula. Today, we're going to talk about how we hit 12 quarters in a row. Yes, you heard right, 12 quarters. Number one, we're going to talk about what might keep you right now from being as predictable as we were. Then we're going to move into planning, how to build a plan that you can actually execute, both top down and bottom up. And lastly, planning is great, but really the core of it is execution. We're going to talk about how you can relentlessly execute against that plan every day, every week, every quarter. I like this. And then
yeah, prep. Okay, we're good to go.
Oh, no, I don't have any coffee anymore.
You want a break?
No, this was my intro.
Oh, the eternal struggle of the intro. No, I was actually, I was like, how can we get better at this? And I was Googling how to make a podcast intro. And you know what I found?
Nothing.
Good
Google's
music.
broke.
Find some good music. Okay, check. Done. Anyway, today we're going to tell a bit of a story about predictable revenue.
That's it.
And you and I talked about, hey, what are we going to call the episode? Should it be predictable revenue this or that? And it was like, that's really snake oil. We're going to tell a story about how we experienced predictable revenue and effectively hit 12 quarters in a row, which is really significant.
And, you know, if I might add, taking most of those learnings, not only for this company here, but also for the product that we're building to help other companies achieve something similar, right? So there's a little bit of advertisement in here, but that's part of what we're building.
I'll try and steer you clear of the advertising part.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Let's focus on the learnings. But that's really what we're going to do. And I think before we just jump into how we did it, the mechanics, what I think is going to be super important is let's spend a bit of time talking about what are some of the structures and processes that are holding companies back or preventing them from even starting to think about predictable revenue.
Yeah. I think it starts with understanding your revenue engine. That's kind of the first step. Really trying to figure out how do these things work? What is it that I need to input or tweak in order to achieve what end result? And for many organizations, they actually have that. They're just not realizing that they have it already and they don't think about it in that specific way. I think the next thing then, and this is usually where I go and rant a little bit about CFOs and like, these guys. The point here is that the reason for organizations then not to achieve predictable revenue is there's some plan that they need to execute. It kind of doesn't really work out. And then what they thought would be, the predictable outcome suddenly isn't, right? And that's not really the fault of the execution team. Might be though. It's sometimes also just a planning error, basically, right? You have a planning error, therefore you don't get to the predictable number that you thought you would get to, and then you basically, call everything into question. Instead, kind of having that, removing both sides of that error equation, the planning and the execution side, if you kind of make that really nicely, I think then you kind of get to the predictable outcome that many people are hoping for.
So are there some telltale signs that maybe you're not doing it the right way already today?
I think telltale signs, and maybe this is more anecdotal, you have something that sometimes comes from the top. So the CEO, hey, are we predictable? Do we have a scalable engine? Are we a scale up? And then yes, we are everything 100%. And really, what does it mean to be a scale up or to be ready for scale? It really means that you have understood that you can do certain things in a repetitive manner to achieve the same outcome. So in an outbound world, you have shown that you hired not 1 or 2, but 10 or 20 SDRs. You onboarded them all through the same process and or always improving process. You see them being able to produce those opportunities at a certain scale, and you see those opportunities close at a certain rate. Once you have achieved that is one scalable channel. And then how do you scale it? You add more people, right? And really, what you're trying to achieve here is you're trying to achieve something that is repeatable. Yeah, hiring those SDRs, putting them through the same process, closing at a certain rate. And that then becomes scalable over time. And what's really important to note here is sometimes I equate this to you really want to make sure to have, to make the average Joe sales rep successful. if all of your go-to-market depends on 2 or 3 brilliant ladies or guys, that is not repeatable, right? Kind of only hiring perfect talent, that's not a winning formula, right? And you might have the same with partnerships, you might have the same in marketing, you might have the same with all kinds of different channels. Once you reach a point where you can do things repeatedly, then in my world, you would be considered a scale up. And that means you have passed the go-to-market fit stage, which, then really you can start scaling.
So really it's about the maturity of the business. And I think we talked about in a previous episode, finding the one thing to scale, which is really, if you haven't found that yet, just go a couple of episodes back, listen to that, and then it's a very different game you need to play before thinking about achieving predictable revenue.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day. Okay, gotcha. So I also think that maybe transitions us nicely into the story, right? Because we had, at the company you and I worked together, found one thing to scale. And we should jump into that story and that methodology of how did we start hitting 12 quarters in a row? And then obviously it follows there was a quarter we didn't hit before those 12.
Yes. So and I think that's why I started out with the understanding bit.
Yeah.
It's really important to understand your engine before you can try and be predictable about it. It's like trying to predict the weather. You need to understand, how this whole physics thing works in the atmosphere before you can start maybe predicting it. And it's really the same thing here. And what happened there in the company so Falcon, where we both worked, we went through a rough period. We were already past 10 million at this point. We were clearly a scale up. A couple of things worked, and we started pushing and pushing. Whatever worked more and more, and suddenly we realized, hey, wait a minute, the stuff that we set up wasn't as scalable as we thought it was, which obviously at that scale, it's pretty expensive. I mean, we're talking burning €1 million a month. Some people might think this is not much, but yeah, it was a lot for us back then. And crisis, and then trying to figure out, okay, how do we get out of this here? Which really then resulted in understanding, oh, wait a minute, this is how we're generating revenue, right? And up until then, it was, hey, let's hire all of those AEs, and sure, we need to hire some in marketing and outbound as well. But this outbound thing, it's really just those kids on Facebook. We were selling social media management software. Yeah. So, it makes sense. And that's more like a luxury add-on to have, but not really, maybe kind of a hiring pipeline for the E's, but that's it. And then, going through the crisis, again, right, I think I told the story a few times now. We crunched the numbers. We figured out, wait a minute, this is actually working. This is how it works. It's all about the opportunity production. Actually, we can even benchmark the outbound opportunity production versus the marketing opportunity production. We can do some resource allocation and so forth. And that was really this was the start, right? And this is where some of the snake oilishness maybe comes into it. We realized, hey, wait a minute, all of this is about these opportunities. We need to focus on adding more and more of those opportunities in order to scale. But, as we walked into the next quarter every time, we knew how many opportunities were produced. We knew how many people we had in seats. We knew more or less exactly how many more opportunities we're going to produce for the next 6 weeks. That was the important threshold because we had, X amount of days of sales cycle. So it was fairly easy for us to figure out, where we're going to land next quarter and then kind of set the bar in the right level, which then, sometimes was above what the board wanted. Sometimes was a bit below because hiring was low or something like that. So really, balancing those two things out is, with the understanding that opportunities are driving this whole thing. That's really what helped us get to this winning streak.
So we had basically found the one thing to scale. And it was essentially one thing because, I recall sitting in marketing at that point in time, obviously it was a very different state compared to what we have been used to. We could deliver let's say a stable production, but we hadn't really cracked the nut for scaling it. And there's, I think, multiple reasons for it back then. But we have found the one channel in SDRs, so sales development reps, basically booking meetings for account executives who would then demo and close, right?
Yes. So the thing is, looking back, talking to the Falcon folks now, they're still at roughly 40-50% inbound. And honestly, this is the same ratio we had from the start.
Yeah.
So really what that means, and maybe this goes against what I said before, we didn't have the full understanding what we need to do on the marketing side to create, what outcome. But we did do a bunch of things right. You did a bunch of things right.
We can talk about them in another episode.
And basically, what that means is, while the ratio was the same, things that we did kept on scaling afterwards, right? And many of these things, I'm sure, if we were to dig into it, is around direct and branded search and organic branded search and stuff. Really figuring out, or really kind of making sure that the market knows who we are and come to us when it's time, right?
I mean, it's also easier for an SDR if they know who you are when you're calling, right? And I think the struggle, it's not that we as a team executed poorly or anything of that sort. It's we could not directly relate the work always to the revenue. And we could with SDRs. It's so much easier to draw that line. And I think, again, it's back to finding that one thing to scale you talked about, right? So having that in place. So basically we had found that, right? And one of the things you and I have talked about is also the whole exercise of setting then the target, which is, a key part of then being predictable, knowing how much can we do. I think we should dig into this piece as well, because it's one of the, big challenges you can face in an org. Right, you have the push from the top. This is what we want, and then the team saying, "Yeah, well."
Yeah, and I think here we're going a little bit into the planning part of the predictability equation. So what you really want to avoid is to make stupid planning mistakes that then prevent you from being predictable, and that then make you look like a fool. The whole team actually towards the board, but also towards the organization. Let's not forget that, right? So, people will understand what the target is, and they will understand if you're falling short, and they will form their opinion based on that. And really, on the planning side, the way I think, which is a good practice, people should go about it, is there should be a top-down target. I think it's really important. I think how founders and CEOs and executive teams should actually approach it is really so the board can tell us how we should look like, next year, in 2 years, in order to have the highest, next funding round success. That should be the idea of a top-down approach, top-down target, which might have nothing to do with reality, by the way. And that's okay, but that's the direction. And then there should be a process internally that comes maybe from revenue operations together with the CRO and the whole, commercial team, to figure out, okay, how can we build best towards that dream setup? Instead of, taking what the board said, doing that number divided by ACV, average contract value, gives me so many new customers we need to have and so many MQLs. That is the wrong way to do it. The right way to do it is to really figure out, okay, what are the things we have, what does the engine look like today? What can we ideally achieve going towards that dreamland that the board painted? And then figure out what's the gap, what can we do about it? Does the bottom-up approach, does that need to go a bit further up? Or the top-down, does that need to come down a little bit? And usually when you add cost to the whole thing, right, really thinking about the budgeting process and so forth, there's a kind of a circular error here that needs to be concluded at some point, which is, well, we were thinking you add so many more revenues, which then also, provides cash to pay for all of the salaries that you need. If you can't get to that revenue number, actually we also have a lower CAC budget for you to kind of dip into, which then in reverse means, oh, wait a minute, I don't have that much budget to spend. So then actually my revenue number comes down further, right? And kind of solving that usually takes a lot of time. But getting to the point where those two things are, let's just say, closely aligned, it doesn't need to be the same, but closely aligned. I think that is the first step to set yourself up for a predictable revenue success, if you will, opposed to let's do a loose bottom up, and in the end we need to do whatever the board said anyway. So let's just try and do that, right? Doing that, I think that will make it very hard for you to be predictable in your revenue.
So I think the important thing you noted here is there's top down, a target arrives. And then it's not just a matter of the team, let's say marketing or sales, doing reverse math and say, okay, well, this is the amount of opportunities we need to produce. Then it's still top down at the end of the day. And I think what is incredibly powerful is you have a team that is not baked into marketing. It's not baked into sales. It's a separate team who, by the way, are experts in how ideally the whole revenue engine is working at any given business. They can very objectively go in and say, okay, from a marketing standpoint, this will be the gap. From a sales standpoint, this will be the gap, and be that really, really important partner along with the teams, and then articulate, well, what will we need then in order to close that gap?
And I think what's super important, right? Revenue operations is not the expert in all of these things.
No.
Right? To be really clear about this, it's still the VP marketing, still the VP sales, and so forth. Those brains need to be leveraged in order to come up with the best thing going forward. Revenue operations should be there to facilitate the process, but also to connect the dots.
Yeah.
So what does it mean if marketing wants to do that for sales? Right? Do we need more people? Do we need fewer people? How do we go about this, right? And this is just one of those examples that tie two different silos together, but there are plenty more, right? And then the other bit is also that revenue operations in that sense is egoless, right? They're not thinking about themselves, hey, I'm sales, I need more salespeople and more commission. They're thinking about the whole revenue engine, how it works together. So you really have a nice arbiter in the process here that's given seniority. And I know that, if you are a sales ops person right now that is working on commissions and CRM stuff, it's difficult to kind of get into that position as you have more seniority in your organization, as the organization hires someone that is more senior in revenue operations, more and more power of that process should go to that person.
So at this point in time, then hopefully there's some idea of how to go about creating our target. It's really, top down. There comes a direction from the board and the CEO and the C-suite. You start the whole bottom-up process. There's some negotiation. You land on a plan. You land on a target, right? And we did that at Falcon. But then once the plan is set, execution begins.
Yes.
And one of the things you highlighted recently was we had a relentless focus on execution. So let's talk a bit about this one, because there will be some companies that does a great job at building a plan and a target, and then they look back at the year and go, we did none of that.
Yes. So sometimes I say the planning part, while important, it's really just a necessary evil.
Let's get it over with.
Planning alone doesn't do anything for you.
No.
It's really just the foundation. And sometimes you say, hey, this is the 20%, the 80%. The 80% is really the execution, right? It's a bit of, leaning towards the Pareto thing. You do the 20% super quickly and so forth. And the important piece here now is to figure out, how do you actually drive that plan into the organization? And that was, for us back then, that was a big thing to try and figure out. And how do you keep everyone, on track, on pace all the time? And there are a couple of, I feel, cadences that the organization needs to set up for this to happen. And one cadence, we talked about this already, a couple of times, quarterly business reviews, monthly business reviews, and so forth. And really the point of this is sure to, show everyone graphs and understand and so forth. But it's also to keep driving, hey, those are the numbers we need. If we don't get those numbers, then this will happen over here, and we're in a world of pain. And if that hire doesn't happen, we won't get to those numbers and so forth, right? Really making really clear for everyone how all of these different moving pieces hang together, right? Building this understanding, not only with the VP of sales, who probably usually gets it. Same, by the way, for VP marketing and so forth. But it's really also for your HR department, your talent attraction department. Hiring good people takes longer, and hiring good people at scale is really difficult. And yes, if those SDRs or marketing people or so forth, if they start a little bit later, well, that actually has an impact, right? So really making it really, really clear for everyone what they need to do, by when, checking in that it actually happens. And that really is, that means driving execution in a relentless way. We took it as far, and I think it was too far, but maybe this is my fault. This was for me daily.
Yeah.
I didn't check the status on a hire daily, but what you actually want to do in order to keep this momentum up, instead of just having a monthly or quarterly check-in, you actually as an organization should try and find ways to measure your progress towards the goal on a daily cadence. I would totally recommend that for everyone. And what it meant for us, if this is part of the Falcon culture that is still alive, by the way. Every 10th meeting booked in the meeting book channel resulted in a we call that, this is a PAM. P-A-M, so it's a German kind of
umlaut.
Yeah. And in the beginning, we were high-fiving on 10 meetings.
This was
a
on
day.
Slack, by the way.
This was all on Slack. 10 meetings per day. We high-fived on that. 4 to 5 came from marketing, 4 to 5 came from sales and so forth. By the time I left, I think we were up to 30, 35 meetings booked per day, by the way. And then, a good old friend of mine that's still in the team sent me a LinkedIn message the other month or so, is a little bit back, with a screenshot of the Slack channel of them doing 100 meetings in a day. Right?
So it was definitely the one thing to scale.
That is freaking scale. I mean, it's not only outbound, it's also inbound. It's the whole thing. But really what you then achieve with this is we basically started setting daily targets. So, hey, and I carried this also into Plan Day. We call it there the magic number. It was a little bit less inspirational, I guess. But basically every day we needed to get to the 10, 12, 15, 20, 25 meetings booked per day. And yes, we understand that there's a drop-off between meetings booked to meetings held and meetings accepted and all of those things. But basically, the cool thing about it is it's super immediate, it's super clear. You can push for it the same day, which is really important. And that then created everyone in the organization knew, if it was a Wednesday and we didn't hit the 12 meetings a day, everyone knew we were behind right now. Yeah, it was very simple for everyone. And everyone was celebrating like crazy when we hit it. When we hit the 12, it was a high five moment. If we then got to 15, people like, wow, this is flying. We're going in the right direction. And you can think what you will, but it does help to steer the organization. And to finish that point, we actually tried to find, and I don't think we fully succeeded, but that's really something to combine the sales and marketing engine. We tried to find something similar for the CS and support organization. We didn't end up with the perfect thing. There were some ideas that we threw around, and some of that we tried out. It just didn't. We didn't find the same cadence. But having a cadence like that was extremely powerful.
Yeah, and I remember we would talk about it in the marketing team. Yesterday was a great day. Did you see? And every day I would at least look at how are we trending. So yesterday we did this amount of opportunities. This amount was from marketing. What does the forecast look like? How much revenue has been closed? And that's absolutely key to have that finger on the pulse as well. Obviously, in marketing, you have a bunch of leading indicators as well you need to pay attention to. But it's just to say that was super helpful. So that was kind of a daily thing. But we also had a way of working that I think it followed a bit after, once we started getting a bit more predictable, we also got more and more organized on execution. We started implementing Scrum, among others. Not like fully Scrum, but more the principles, I should say. Let's talk a bit about that, because that's another key proponent of execution, probably more rooted for marketing and some of the higher ups in sales. So let's get into that one.
Yes. I almost forgot about this one. Yeah, you're right. So if you think about your commercial teams, and let's just say, so I started dividing them into process teams and project teams. And some teams are a bit of a blend of both. If you are a process part of the commercial engine, it's really, meetings booked, or maybe customers onboarded or something like that. Those kind of metrics you're hunting and you're trying to push up. And if you're sitting on the project side of the organization, which usually tends to be more marketing is more project driven. Yes, they have their metrics, but it's more project driven. Revenue operations, typical project driven piece. And then you have some people in sales leadership and CS leadership that have a little bit more of a project-driven piece to them as well, right?
Yeah.
But I felt it was a little bit overkill to try and include them in a Scrum setup. However, for revenue operations and for marketing, we started using Scrum at a time when it still wasn't. I feel by now it's almost being mainstream actually for marketing and the RevOps team to use Scrum. Yeah. We tried it out early on, and really the idea here was, obviously my brain went to, t-shirt sizes, let's, measure the whole thing and let's see, where we get.
Burn down charts.
Yes. And this is the wrong way to take it. But if you really live Scrum, what it does help you with, again, is some of the principles that we have in this daily high five. The daily high five is this, well, we know the target, we know got there, we didn't get there. And that is like very clear transparency, right? That's transparency, and transparency then builds accountability. Scrum is the same fundamentals to a degree. It's, what do we need? What do we want to do the next 2 weeks, the sprint, the cycle, whatever we're calling it these days. And then there's, did we achieve it? Let's look back, the retrospective, the review, kind of what can we do better and so forth. And obviously this helps, especially in a project world, to understand dependencies and, hey, you need to actually help me with this. And, oh, wow, you can't. Well, that means I actually now need to do something else differently and so forth, right? It creates that collaboration aspect as well. But it also has this, and I think it's only me liking it, but it also has this, self-selecting in. So I want to get these tasks done. And, if you set yourself the target, then it's completely different from someone saying, hey, Mikkel, you need to do these 5 things. And I really like this dynamic. I really like it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I recall running it for marketing. So we'd have the Monday planning session, pull in tasks from various projects. Then we did stand-ups, and then came the review on a Friday, which was always really nice because you'd show the work that had been done and you get that sense of accomplishment. For me, as a leader at that point in time, it also meant that I could take those takeaways and bring them into the management sessions. So I could bring transparency there. And I would also know where potentially we're behind or we need input from another department. So we could work that out for the team, for them to basically progress. So removing those obstacles from the team. And in the same, on the other side of the coin, also, if we needed to reprioritize, because, we didn't book those 12 meetings the other day that we needed to. So we need to shift a little bit. I'd be able to bring that back to the team, clearly explain why, and everyone would know what was delivered, what is happening, what are the priorities of the day. I think there's both good and bad in Scrum, and it's going to be different for every team how they want to run it. But at least for that focus on execution, it was immensely helpful.
Yeah. And I think, taking 2 or 3 steps back here, I recently had a call, was a head of RevOps, and he very much included in the strategy process and, how we're going to set the plan. And then, he lived it through like weekly check-ins with the commercial team. And I was pointing out, hey, that sounds like a wide gap, right? You have the annual planning over here, and then you have weekly operational, maybe tactical check-ins. That usually kind of feels like a large gap, right? And that was really driven by, yes, we had daily targets for some people, or for some teams rather. It wasn't for people actually. And then we had, for the more project-oriented data teams, the Scrum setup, right? And then really, bridging this with, monthly and quarterly check-ins, both for, the sales kickoff and new targets and so forth, but also the monthly more for, in a Scrum world, you probably would call it the retrospective, kind of what is going well, what isn't going well, and then trying to take that time to get your engine, to understand it a little bit better instead of being lost in tactical operational world all the time.
Yeah. But I think it's a fair point. And again, this is just one of the frameworks among many you can use to have that relentless focus on execution. So maybe just summing it up, there's quarterly business reviews, monthly business reviews, weekly check-ins, and then there's how the teams operate.
And there's all of those cadences, and people can do them differently. What is really important is that all of these things tie into one another. If your daily meetings booked number doesn't add up to your monthly or quarterly target, it's rubbish. If your quarterly targets don't add up to your annual target, it's all rubbish. If these things don't make sense, if your lead number doesn't work with the opportunity number marketing needs to create, it's all rubbish. And all of these things will get to the surface really quickly. Once you have your first couple of check-ins, once you have your first couple of, difficult conversations, Mikkel, why didn't you hit this number? Then you will point out, well, because, this number over there is completely wrong. So it doesn't make any sense. And, and suddenly you get not stuck, but pushed into a world where your full funnel needs to be properly planned out, and then you slice it into daily and weekly and monthly and quarterly bits, and then the whole team needs to execute against it.
So, it's funny. We talked about hitting 12 quarters in a row, and there was not, one silver bullet in there.
Well, that's right.
It's just a lot of work, actually, is what it is.
It's a lot of freaking work. It's doable though. It's not snake oil.
No.
Whatever your finance team is trying to tell you, it's not snake oil. It's a combination of not making any planning errors and not making any execution errors.
And there's plenty of companies publicly listed that keep on hitting targets.
But that's boring.
That's also bullshit.
That's boring.
Come on, that's fun. No, okay. Well, that was another good episode recorded.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, it's really fun, and I hope you, the wonderful listener out there, enjoyed this episode. Hopefully, next time there's going to be some paint on the wall here.
I hope you're taking some stuff away, and again, feel free to either hit me up on the growth letter or on my LinkedIn or wherever I'm around.
YouTube too.
Yes, and let me know what should be improved or what we should maybe be talking about instead.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for listening.
Okay, take care. Bye.